October 27, 1943, Bougainville Island, Solomon Islands. In the darkness before dawn, the first waves of U.S. Marines stormed ashore at Cape Torokina, their boots crunching on volcanic sand, still warm from the previous day's sun. Behind them, waiting aboard crowded transport ships, were men carrying not rifles but surveying equipment, not ammunition but blueprints. The Seabees, U.S. Navy Construction Battalion personnel, had been given an impossible assignment: construct a fully operational fighter strip on hostile ground within 2 weeks. Japanese commanders monitoring Allied radio traffic dismissed the reports with contempt, certain that building an airfield under constant bombardment was folly. American planners had estimated the project would require at least 6 weeks with proper equipment and security. The Seabees would complete it in 10 days, working through air raids that killed 18 of their number and wounded dozens more. The United States entered 1942 reeling from disaster. Pearl Harbor lay in ruins. The Philippines had fallen. Japanese forces controlled an arc of territory stretching from the Aleutians to the Solomon Islands, fortifying each strategic position with bunkers, airstrips, and supply depots. American military planners recognized a fundamental problem. Modern warfare in the Pacific required advanced bases close to enemy positions, but constructing these facilities under fire had never been attempted on the necessary scale. On January 5, 1942, Rear Admiral Ben Moriel submitted a proposal to the Bureau of Navigation that would transform military engineering. The Navy needed construction workers who could defend themselves, men who understood both combat and carpentry, welding and warfare. Traditional civilian contractors working under Navy protection had proven inadequate during the early months of the conflict. At Wake Island in December 1941, civilian construction workers had fought alongside Marines but lacked military training and equipment. Many were killed or captured because they had no official military status and no combat preparation. Moriel's solution was the Naval Construction Battalion, abbreviated to CB and quickly nicknamed the Seabees. These units would be composed of skilled tradesmen, carpenters, electricians, mechanics, heavy equipment operators, given military rank and combat training. The concept faced immediate skepticism. Army engineers questioned whether civilians could adapt to military discipline. Marine commanders doubted construction workers could hold their positions under fire. The Japanese, monitoring American communications, viewed the entire program with derision. Japanese intelligence reports from mid-1942 characterized the Seabees as evidence of American desperation, describing them as construction coolies in uniforms who would flee at the first sight of combat. This assessment seemed reasonable given that many Seabee recruits were over 40 years old, well beyond the typical age for combat troops. The average age of Seabee personnel in 1942 was 37, with numerous men in their 50s and a handful past 60. What the Japanese failed to understand was that age brought experience. These were men who had built dams, bridges, highways, and refineries during the Depression, men who knew how to improvise solutions with whatever materials were available. The first Seabee battalions received training at naval construction training centers in Virginia, Rhode Island, and California. The program combined basic military discipline with specialized instruction in amphibious operations and defensive tactics. Each battalion comprised approximately 1,000 men organized into 4 companies. Standard equipment included bulldozers, road graders, dump trucks, cement mixers, and portable sawmills. What they lacked was protection. Early Seabee operations relied on marine security, as the construction battalions possessed limited heavy weapons and no organic artillery. By December 1942, skepticism pervaded both American and Japanese military circles. U.S. commanders expected that Seabee construction projects would proceed slowly, requiring extensive marine protection and consuming precious shipping space for equipment that might prove useless under fire. Japanese planners anticipated that any American attempt to build airfields on contested islands would fail, forcing the enemy to rely on distant bases and limiting operational range. Both assessments underestimated what determination and skill could achieve under impossible conditions. The Solomon Islands campaign revealed the critical importance of air superiority in the Pacific. Without nearby airstrips, American bombers and fighters operated at maximum range, limiting their effectiveness and time over target. Japanese forces controlled Rabaul on New Britain, a massive base complex with multiple airfields hosting over 300 aircraft. From Rabaul, Japanese planes could strike any Allied position in the Solomons within hours. American strategy required a methodical advance up the Solomon chain, establishing air bases that could support further operations while degrading Japanese capabilities at Rabaul. The plan was sound in theory but faced practical obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Each island presented unique challenges: dense jungle vegetation, volcanic soil, mountainous terrain, and tropical diseases. More critically, every construction site would be within range of Japanese air and naval forces based at Rabaul and Bougainville. Admiral William Halsey, commanding South Pacific Forces, expressed the strategic calculus in a February 1943 staff meeting. Give me airfields within 200 miles of Rabaul, and I'll put that base out of action within 6 months. The mathematics was straightforward. American fighters had combat radii of approximately 300 miles. Bombers could reach 500 miles with meaningful payload. Japanese defenses extended in concentric circles around Rabaul, forcing Allied aircraft to penetrate increasingly heavy anti-aircraft fire and fighter interception. Closer bases meant more aircraft over target, longer patrol times, and better odds of survival for damaged planes attempting to return home. The problem was construction time. Standard engineering estimates suggested that building a functional airstrip in the jungle required 3 to 4 months, even under ideal conditions. Survey the terrain, clear vegetation, level the ground, establish drainage, compact the surface, and lay either concrete or steel matting. Japanese forces had spent years fortifying their positions, using local labor and ample supplies brought in before American submarines interdicted their shipping lanes. American planners could not wait months for each new base. The campaign would stall, giving Japan time to reinforce their positions or withdraw forces for defense of more critical areas. Initial assessments of Seabee capabilities were pessimistic. The construction battalions had performed adequately in rear area work during 1942, building facilities in secure locations like New Caledonia and Samoa. Combat construction was different. Working under fire required new techniques, dispersed equipment to minimize losses from air raids, rapid construction schedules that prioritized functionality over perfection, and willingness to accept casualties as the price of maintaining pace. Military planners doubted civilian workers, even with military training, could maintain productivity while Japanese bombs fell around them. The Japanese confidence in their defensive positions was not unfounded. Guadalcanal had demonstrated how difficult it was to maintain supply lines across vast ocean distances while under constant air and submarine attack. American forces had nearly lost that campaign despite eventual success. Japanese strategists calculated that American construction efforts on subsequent islands would face even greater obstacles as supply lines stretched further and Japanese resistance intensified. They viewed the Seabees as a desperate improvisation that would fail when tested by determined opposition. Guadalcanal tested every assumption about combat construction. The 6th Naval Construction Battalion arrived at Henderson Field in September 1942, finding a partially completed Japanese airstrip and chaos. Marines held a precarious perimeter around the airfield while Japanese forces controlled most of the island and continued to land reinforcements at night. Naval bombardment from Japanese warships turned the airstrip into a cratered moonscape every few days. Bombers attacked daily. The Seabees worked anyway. They had inadequate equipment, 3 bulldozers, 2 graders, 4 dump trucks, and a handful of smaller machines. Japanese air raids destroyed 2 bulldozers within the first week. The remaining equipment ran 24 hours daily, operators working in shifts that ended only when mechanical breakdowns forced repairs. When spare parts proved unavailable, Seabee mechanics cannibalized damaged vehicles, fabricating replacement components from scrap metal salvaged from wrecked Japanese planes. The work demanded improvisation beyond any peacetime construction project. Drainage ditches were dug by hand because graders were occupied leveling the runway. Coral was hauled from nearby beaches to provide stable foundation material, loaded by men wielding shovels because mechanical loaders had been destroyed. When cement supplies ran short, Seabees experimented with mixing volcanic ash into the concrete, discovering that local materials could substitute for Portland cement if properly processed. Henderson Field became operational not because the Seabees had ideal resources, but because they refused to admit defeat. Japanese commanders monitoring the situation expressed confusion in radio intercepts decoded by American intelligence. How were the Americans maintaining an operational airfield while under daily bombardment? The Japanese had bombed Henderson's runway 73 times between August and November 1942, cratering it repeatedly, yet American aircraft continued operating, sometimes taking off just hours after the latest raid. The answer lay in Seabee work habits. Repair crews moved onto the runway before the bombs stopped falling, filling craters with coral and steel matting while Japanese bombers flew home to reload. This relentless pace produced results that defied expectations. Henderson Field went from a cratered, partially completed strip to a functioning base supporting Marine fighter squadrons in less than 2 weeks of Seabee work. By October 1942, the field hosted bombers as well. enabling American forces to attack Japanese shipping attempting to reinforce their troops on Guadalcanal. The strategic impact was immediate. Japanese reinforcement convoys suffered devastating losses, and American control of Guadalcanal became increasingly secure. The cost was measurable in human terms. The 6th Construction Battalion lost 28 men killed and 44 wounded during their first 3 months on Guadalcanal. These were not combat troops trained for infantry warfare, but construction workers who had volunteered to build rather than fight. Yet when Japanese ground attacks threatened the airfield perimeter, Seabees grabbed rifles and reinforced marine positions. They fought because losing Henderson Field would mean losing everything they had built, and the Seabees took professional pride in completing their assignments regardless of circumstances. By January 1943, Henderson Field had expanded to include multiple runways, extensive taxiways, revetments for over 100 aircraft, and complete support facilities. The transformation from jungle to air base had required 5 months of continuous work under combat conditions. To Japanese observers, the achievement seemed impossible. To American planners, it suggested that the Seabees might be capable of even more ambitious projects if properly supported. The Bougainville landing on November 1, 1943, marked the most ambitious Seabee project yet attempted. The 71st Naval Construction Battalion came ashore behind the Marines, immediately beginning reconnaissance of potential airfield sites. Japanese resistance was fierce. Artillery fire from positions in the surrounding hills fell continuously on the beachhead. Air raids struck twice daily. The Seabees started working before the Marines had fully secured the perimeter. Specifications called for a fighter strip 3,500 feet long and 150 feet wide, capable of supporting Marine Corsair fighters and Army P-38 Lightnings. The site selected was swampland, chosen because it offered flat terrain close to the beach. Japanese planners had avoided building there for good reason. The ground consisted of volcanic mud that would not support heavy loads without extensive preparation. Engineers estimated 6 weeks minimum to create a stable runway foundation. The Seabees were told they had 10 days because Marine fighters needed the strip operational before Japanese reinforcements could arrive. The 71st Battalion attacked the problem with techniques learned at Guadalcanal and refined during subsequent projects. First, they used explosives to blast drainage channels through the worst sections of swamp, allowing standing water to flow toward the ocean. Then bulldozers pushed coconut logs into the mud, creating a mat of timber that could support heavier equipment. On top of the logs went layers of crushed coral hauled from nearby beaches, compacted by repeated passes of road rollers. Finally, interlocking sections of mast and mat steel planking covered the coral, creating an all-weather surface that could withstand the punishment of repeated aircraft landings. Japanese artillery made every phase dangerous. Spotters in the hills could observe the entire construction site, calling in fire on concentrations of equipment and personnel. The Seabees learned to disperse their machinery, never parking more than 2 vehicles within 100 yards of each other. They worked in small groups rather than large crews, reducing casualties when shells landed. Bulldozer operators welded armor plates to the front and sides of their cabs, creating improvised protection that stopped shrapnel if not direct hits. The pace never slackened. Work continued through air raids, crews diving into foxholes when bombs fell, then returning to their equipment once the planes passed. Night work preceded by blackout conditions, operators navigating by memory and whispered directions from ground guides. Sleep came in 4-hour shifts, and even that was frequently interrupted by Japanese artillery or combat alerts. Men operated on exhaustion and determination, driven by knowledge that Marine fighters overhead depended on having a functional runway. On November 10th, 9 days after the landing, the first Marine Corsair touched down at Torokina. The pilot reported the surface adequate but rough. The Seabees continued working, smoothing and extending the runway, while Marine fighters flew combat air patrol overhead. By November 15th, the strip supported full operations, fighters launching to intercept Japanese bombers, returning aircraft being refueled and rearmed by Navy ground crews, and casualties being evacuated in cargo planes that could now land safely. Japanese commanders at Rabaul recognized the disaster too late. American fighters based at Torokina could reach Rabaul in less than an hour, suddenly placing Japanese air operations under constant threat. The strategic balance had shifted in a matter of days, rather than the months Japanese planners had anticipated for American base construction. Radio intercepts revealed bitter recriminations among Japanese staff officers, with some blaming faulty intelligence for underestimating American construction capabilities. The 71st Battalion lost 18 men killed during the first 2 weeks of construction at Torokina. Among them was Chief Carpenter's mate Joseph Lamana, killed by Japanese artillery while directing a bulldozer clearing jungle for runway expansion. His obituary in the Navy's construction bulletin noted that he died as he had lived, building something that would outlast him. The Torokina airfield remained in use until the end of the war, supporting thousands of sorties against Japanese positions throughout the region. The island-hopping campaign transformed into a race between Japanese demolition and American construction. As Allied forces seized each new objective, they found airfields systematically destroyed, runways cratered by explosives, equipment wrecked beyond repair, fuel dumps burned. Japanese engineers proved adept at denying facilities to the advancing Americans, but they had not anticipated how quickly the Seabees could rebuild what had been destroyed. Munda Airfield on New Georgia illustrated the pattern. Japanese forces had constructed an excellent facility, complete with multiple runways, extensive revetments, and underground storage facilities carved into coral cliffs. When American forces captured the base in August 1943, they found the main runway destroyed by systematic demolition. Charges placed every 50 feet had created a continuous line of craters. Japanese defenders had also demolished the control tower, destroyed parked aircraft, and blown up fuel storage tanks before retreating. The 24th Naval Construction Battalion began repairs while fighting still raged in other parts of New Georgia. Their assignment was to render Munda operational within 72 hours for emergency landings, then restore full capability within 2 weeks. They achieved both objectives, pioneering techniques that became standard practice for rapid airfield rehabilitation. Rather than filling every crater properly, they filled alternate craters completely while bridging the remaining holes with steel matting, creating an uneven but functional surface. Full repairs could wait until the urgent tactical requirement had been met. Equipment became the limiting factor rather than enemy action. Each Seabee battalion possessed substantial construction machinery, but maintenance in tropical conditions proved challenging. Salt air corroded electrical systems, volcanic dust abraded engine components. Operator error destroyed equipment that could not be replaced. By mid-1943, Seabee maintenance crews had become expert at prolonging equipment life through improvisation, fabricating parts from salvaged materials when supply chains failed to deliver necessary components. The Seabees also learned to exploit captured Japanese equipment. At Munda, they discovered 4 Japanese road rollers in relatively good condition, hidden beneath camouflage netting in hopes of future use. Seabee mechanics restored the machines to operation within 2 days, putting them to work compacting runway surfaces alongside American equipment. Similar salvage operations occurred throughout the campaign. Japanese trucks were repaired and repainted, generators were converted to American voltage standards, and construction materials stockpiled by Japanese forces were incorporated into American projects. Statistical analysis revealed the accelerating pace of construction. Henderson Field on Guadalcanal required 5 months to reach full operational capability. Torokina on Bougainville achieved the same status in 3 weeks. Munda on New Georgia was operational for emergency use in 3 days and fully restored in 10. Each project taught lessons that accelerated subsequent efforts: better site selection techniques, improved coordination between Seabees and combat units, more efficient equipment deployment, and refined logistical planning that ensured critical materials arrived when needed. The Solomon Islands campaign generated 19 operational airfields between August 1942 and November 1943. 13 were built entirely by Seabees on previously undeveloped sites. 6 were Japanese facilities captured and rapidly rehabilitated. Together, these bases supported the progressive isolation of Rabaul, which by early 1944 was effectively neutralized as a Japanese stronghold despite never being directly invaded. American aircraft flying from Seabee-built strips attacked Rabaul daily, destroying Japanese planes on the ground and interdicting supply ships attempting to reach the base. Japanese military assessments from late 1943 acknowledged the unexpected effectiveness of American construction operations. Intelligence reports noted that the Seabees had proven capable of feats Japanese engineers considered impossible. One captured document expressed particular amazement at the speed of runway construction, noting that Japanese engineering doctrine called for methodical, careful work, while American practice emphasized rapid results, even at the cost of temporary expedients. The document concluded that American willingness to accept good enough rather than insisting on perfection represented a significant tactical advantage. Behind every Seabee project lay an enormous logistical effort that matched construction achievements in scope and complexity. Building an airfield required not only skilled workers and heavy equipment, but also thousands of tons of materials transported across thousands of miles of ocean. Each runway demanded steel matting, cement, lumber, crushed stone, fuel for equipment, spare parts for repairs, and countless smaller items from nails to surveying instruments. coordinating delivery of these materials to forward combat zones, while Japanese submarines, aircraft, and surface raiders threatened every convoy required planning that would have challenged a major corporation. The Pacific Fleet Service Force handled the immense task of keeping construction projects supplied. Cargo ships traveled from West Coast ports to forward supply depots in Hawaii, Samoa, and New Caledonia, where materials were sorted and forwarded to specific operations. Smaller vessels then carried supplies to actual construction sites, timing their arrivals to match project schedules. A delay of even a few days could halt construction entirely if critical materials failed to arrive when needed, so supply officers maintained detailed schedules that tracked every shipment from warehouse to beachhead. Numbers illustrate the scale. The Torokina operation required approximately 10,000 tons of construction materials delivered during the first month of operations. This total included 4,000 sections of mast and matting weighing 66 pounds each, 3,000 tons of cement in individual 94-pound bags, 1,500 tons of crushed coral, 400 tons of lumber, 250,000 gallons of diesel fuel for construction equipment, and spare parts sufficient to maintain 40 major machines operating continuously. Getting these materials from American ports to Bougainville required 37 cargo ships making repeated voyages under combat conditions. Seabees became expert at improvising when supplies failed to arrive. Cement shortages led to experiments with alternative binders, discovering that volcanic ash mixed with lime could create adequate concrete for temporary structures. Steel shortages prompted increased use of timber, with Seabees sawmills processing logs cut from local forests. Fuel shortages were handled by strict rationing, priority systems that allocated gasoline first to the most critical equipment, and conversion of some vehicles to run on locally distilled alcohol when no other options existed. The supply chain extended back to American factories, operating at maximum capacity to meet Pacific demands. Mast and matting production increased from 5,000 sections monthly in early 1942 to over 100,000 sections monthly by late 1943. Cement production for military use exceeded 2 million barrels monthly. Heavy equipment manufacturers built bulldozers, graders, and dump trucks specifically configured for tropical conditions, with sealed electrical systems, enhanced cooling, and rust-resistant components. Shipping losses added another layer of complexity. Japanese submarines operating around the Solomon Islands sank numerous cargo vessels, sending critical supplies to the ocean floor. The SS John Penn, carrying construction equipment destined for Bougainville, was torpedoed and sunk in November 1943 with complete loss of cargo. The 71st Battalion had to proceed with their projects using equipment from other units, while replacements were manufactured, shipped, and delivered, a process requiring 3 months from order to arrival. Japanese attacks on supply dumps caused additional complications. Air raids targeted material stockpiles with incendiary bombs, destroying months of accumulated supplies in single attacks. The Seabees responded by dispersing materials across wider areas, camouflaging dumps to reduce visibility from the air, and establishing multiple smaller stockpiles, rather than concentrating supplies in vulnerable locations. These measures reduced losses but complicated inventory management and forced construction crews to travel further to obtain necessary materials. Despite every obstacle, the logistics system functioned with remarkable efficiency. Supply officers maintained delivery schedules that kept construction projects moving forward. When problems arose, and they arose constantly, alternatives were found: substitute materials, borrowed equipment, expedited shipping. The Seabees never halted a project because supplies failed to arrive. They adapted plans to use whatever materials were available, maintaining forward momentum even when ideal resources remained stuck somewhere between California and the combat zone. As Seabee construction accelerated across the Pacific, Japanese forces recognized the strategic threat posed by American airfield development. What began as contemptuous dismissal evolved into desperate attempts to destroy construction projects before they became operational. Japanese air raids increasingly targeted construction equipment rather than completed facilities, attempting to slow American progress by destroying the means of construction rather than its results. The pattern emerged at Peleliu in September 1944. The 133rd Naval Construction Battalion landed with marine assault forces, beginning immediate work on rehabilitating the Japanese-built airfield. Within hours of securing the site, Japanese artillery concealed in caves on the island's ridges began targeting construction equipment. Bulldozers represented particular targets because their size made them visible, and their loss would cripple construction efforts. The battalion lost 3 bulldozers to artillery fire on the first day, 2 more the following day, and another 6 during the first week of operations. Seabee casualties mounted accordingly. Operating exposed construction equipment under fire required courage that matched any infantry assault. Bulldozer operators sat in cabs that offered minimal protection, knowing that a direct hit from artillery or a bomb would kill them instantly. They kept working because halting meant mission failure, and the Seabees maintained the same professional standards under fire that they demanded in peacetime construction. If the mission required moving 10,000 cubic yards of earth daily, they moved it regardless of enemy action. Iwo Jima tested Seabee resilience beyond previous limits. The 31st, 62nd, and 133rd Naval Construction Battalions landed with Marine Assault Forces in February 1945, facing an island transformed into a fortress. Japanese defenders had prepared extensive fortifications, understanding that Iwo Jima represented the last major obstacle before American forces could establish bases within striking distance of mainland Japan. The volcanic terrain and concentrated defenses made construction particularly dangerous. Seabees began repairing the existing Japanese airfield, while Marines fought to expand the beachhead. Japanese artillery and mortars subjected the construction site to constant bombardment. Work proceeded anyway, with crews accepting casualties as inevitable rather than allowing enemy fire to halt progress. During the first week of operations, the 3 Seabee battalions lost 44 men killed and over 100 wounded, the highest casualty rate for any Seabee operation of the war. Some died operating construction equipment, others fighting as infantry when Japanese counterattacks penetrated American lines. The Seabees completed the first operational runway at Iwo Jima on March 4, 1945, 23 days after the landing. The achievement came at terrible cost, but provided exactly what American planners required, a base from which damaged B-29 bombers returning from raids on Japan could make emergency landings. The first emergency landing occurred March 4th, just hours after the runway was declared operational. Lieutenant Raymond Marlowe brought his crippled B-29 down safely after combat damage over Tokyo left him with failing engines and insufficient fuel to reach the Marianas. His crew of 11 men survived because Seabees had worked under fire to complete a runway that Japanese defenders had done everything possible to prevent. Statistics documented the toll. Seabee casualties in the Pacific Theater from 1942 through 1945 totaled 272 killed in action and 2,500 wounded. These numbers exceeded casualties suffered by any other non-combat support organization in the U.S. military. The Seabees had proven themselves in combat not by seeking battle, but by refusing to abandon their construction missions regardless of danger. They built under fire because that was their job, maintaining the same professional standards under artillery bombardment that they would have demanded in peacetime projects. Japanese assessments from early 1945 acknowledged the complete failure of efforts to stop American construction operations through military action. Intelligence reports noted that attacking construction equipment and personnel had proven ineffective because the Americans simply replaced losses and continued working. One captured document compared the Seabees to ants, individually vulnerable but collectively unstoppable, with every loss immediately replaced by others who resumed the work without pause. The comparison was intended as tactical analysis, but Seabees, who later read the translation, considered it a compliment. By late 1944, the cumulative impact of Seabee construction had fundamentally altered the strategic balance in the Pacific. The network of airfields stretching from Australia to the Marianas enabled American forces to maintain constant pressure on Japanese positions throughout the region. Japanese commanders could no longer concentrate their forces because American aircraft based at Seabee-built strips could strike anywhere with minimal warning. The defensive perimeter that Japan had spent years establishing had been methodically dismantled, one airfield at a time. Numbers illustrated the transformation. In January 1942, the United States operated 4 major airfields in the Pacific Theater, all located at Pearl Harbor and in Australia. By December 1944, American forces controlled over 100 operational airfields across the Pacific, supporting approximately 5,000 combat aircraft. The Seabees had built 68 of these airfields from scratch and rehabilitated 29 captured Japanese facilities. The remaining bases represented expansion of existing Allied facilities or construction by other organizations, but Seabees had performed the majority of work on almost all sites. The strategic impact was most visible in the Marianas. Seizure of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam in summer 1944 placed American forces within B-29 range of Japan, but only if adequate airfields could be constructed to support the massive bombers. Each B-29 required a runway at least 8,000 feet long, far exceeding the length needed for fighters or medium bombers. Construction specifications demanded heavy-duty pavement capable of supporting aircraft weighing over 130,000 pounds at takeoff. Standard mast and matting would not suffice. Only concrete or asphalt could handle the loads. The Seabees built 6 B-29 bases in the Marianas between July 1944 and February 1945, an achievement that military engineers had estimated would require at least 2 years if attempted. North Field on Tinian became the busiest airfield in the world during 1945, supporting over 500 B-29s operating from 4 parallel runways, each 8,000 feet long. Construction required moving over 13 million cubic yards of earth and coral, laying 1 million square yards of concrete pavement, and installing complete support infrastructure for 20,000 personnel. The work proceeded at a pace that seemed impossible by conventional standards, from jungle to operational airfield in 6 months. Japanese air defenses could not halt the bombing campaign made possible by these bases. Starting in November 1944, B-29s from the Marianas struck Japanese cities with increasing frequency and destructiveness. The firebombing of Tokyo in March 1945 killed an estimated 100,000 people and destroyed 16 square miles of the city. Subsequent raids devastated every major Japanese urban area, destroying industrial facilities, transportation networks, and the morale of the civilian population. All these missions launched from airfields built by Seabees, working under combat conditions. The logistical achievement paralleled the construction feat. Supporting 500 B-29s required aviation gasoline, bombs, spare parts, food, and countless other supplies delivered continuously across vast ocean distances. Seabees built not just runways, but entire base complexes, housing for aircrew and ground personnel, maintenance facilities capable of performing major overhauls, fuel storage farms holding millions of gallons of gasoline, bomb storage bunkers, hospitals, supply warehouses, and all the infrastructure required for a small city operating at maximum intensity. Intelligence assessments documented Japanese recognition of how completely American air power had dominated the Pacific by early 1945. Captured documents revealed bitter debates among Japanese military leaders about how the United States had achieved such rapid construction of advanced facilities. Some blamed their own intelligence services for failing to anticipate American capabilities. Others argued that underestimating civilian construction workers had been a fatal strategic error. All agreed that the network of American airfields had made continued resistance increasingly futile. The end approached rapidly once American bombers could strike Japan directly from the Marianas. Japanese aircraft production, already hampered by material shortages and the loss of trained pilots, collapsed entirely under sustained bombardment. Oil refineries were destroyed, cutting off fuel supplies for remaining aircraft and ships. Transportation networks were shattered, preventing movement of troops or supplies. By August 1945, Japan's capacity to continue the war had been largely eliminated, not by invasion, but by systematic destruction made possible by Seabee-built airfields positioned close enough to reach every target in the Japanese home islands. Iwo Jima represented the climactic test of Seabee capabilities. Everything learned during 3 years of combat construction was applied to a project that would determine whether B-29 bombers could continue their campaign against Japan. The strategic calculation was simple but brutal. Without emergency landing facilities between the Marianas and Japan, damaged bombers would fall into the ocean when they could not reach home bases. Iwo Jima could save hundreds of aircraft and thousands of aircrew lives, but only if runways could be completed while Japanese defenders continued fighting from fortified positions throughout the island. The 3 Seabee battalions assigned to Iwo Jima faced terrain unlike anything encountered previously. Volcanic ash covered the island in layers varying from inches to several feet deep. This material possessed the worst possible characteristics for construction: too loose to support weight, yet sticky enough to clog machinery. Bulldozers sank to their tracks. Trucks became immobilized. Conventional construction techniques proved useless when the ground itself refused to provide stable foundation. The Seabees improvised solutions, learning through trial and error which combinations of coral, steel matting, and compaction could create surfaces that would not collapse under B-29 weight. Japanese artillery complicated every phase of construction. The island's defenders had positioned guns in caves throughout the volcanic ridges, allowing them to observe and target every part of both completed airfields. American counter-battery fire could not eliminate these positions because direct assault by infantry represented the only means of destroying weapons concealed in natural fortifications. The Seabees worked while Japanese shells continued falling, accepting casualties as the price of maintaining the brutal construction schedule. The first B-29 emergency landing at Iwo Jima occurred on March 4, 1945, validating the enormous cost of seizing and developing the island. Lieutenant Raymond Marlowe's bomber, Dynamite, limped onto the runway with 2 engines failed and fuel tanks nearly empty. The runway had been declared operational just hours earlier, barely meeting minimum standards for safe landings. Marlowe's successful touchdown proved that Seabee construction under fire had achieved exactly what strategic planners required: a functional facility, available when needed, not months later after ideal conditions had been established. The pace of emergency landings accelerated rapidly. By March 10th, 23 B-29s had used Iwo Jima's runway for emergency landings. By April 1st, the number exceeded 100. By war's end in August 1945, over 2,400 B-29 emergency landings had occurred at Iwo Jima, saving an estimated 24,000 aircrew members who would otherwise have died in the Pacific Ocean. Every one of those landings occurred on runways built by Seabees working under Japanese artillery fire, driven by professional standards that refused to accept the excuse that combat conditions made good construction impossible. The human cost remained visible throughout the project. Seabee casualties on Iwo Jima totaled 44 killed and over 100 wounded during the first month of operations. Equipment losses were equally severe: bulldozers destroyed by artillery, trucks wrecked by mines, graders rendered useless by shell fragments. The battalions adapted by cannibalizing damaged equipment to keep remaining machines operational, fabricating replacement parts from scrap metal, and working with whatever resources survived each day's bombardment. Japanese defenders recognized the importance of preventing runway construction, but lacked means to stop determined opposition. Artillery bombardment inflicted casualties, but could not halt work that proceeded despite losses. Infantry attacks against Seabee positions were repulsed by Marines providing security and by Seabees themselves, who proved capable of defending their construction sites when circumstances required. The Japanese strategy of making Iwo Jima too costly for American forces to hold had failed in part because the Seabees refused to abandon projects regardless of casualties. By April 1945, Iwo Jima supported full-scale operations by both fighters and bombers. The transformation from volcanic wasteland to operational airbase had required 2 months of continuous work under combat conditions that would have defeated any organization less committed to completing their mission. The Seabees had built not just runways, but complete facilities: taxiways, revetments, fuel storage, repair shops, housing, and all other infrastructure required for sustained operations. The achievement stood as testament to what could be accomplished when professional standards met absolute necessity. Japanese military assessments from early 1945 revealed complete reversal of initial attitudes toward American construction forces. What began as contemptuous dismissal had evolved into grudging respect and ultimately frank acknowledgement that the Seabees represented a capability for which Japanese forces had no equivalent. Intelligence officers analyzing American operations noted that the ability to construct functional airfields within days, rather than months, had fundamentally altered the strategic situation, enabling American forces to advance faster than Japanese. Defenders could establish new defensive positions. The captured documents revealed specific instances where Japanese commanders had made strategic decisions based on faulty assumptions about construction timelines. At Bougainville, Japanese planners had estimated that American airfield construction would require at least 6 weeks, providing time to bring reinforcements from Rabaul. The Seabees completed operational runways in 10 days, forcing Japanese forces to confront American air superiority before their defensive plans could be executed. Similar miscalculations occurred throughout the campaign, as Japanese estimates of construction time consistently exceeded actual Seabee performance by factors of 2 to 5. American military leaders recognized the strategic advantage that Seabee construction capabilities provided. Admiral Chester Nimitz noted in his final report on Pacific operations that the speed of airfield construction had been crucial to maintaining momentum in the island-hopping campaign. Without the ability to quickly establish air bases on captured islands, American forces would have been forced to advance more slowly, allowing Japanese defenders time to prepare subsequent positions. The Seabees' work rate had effectively compressed the entire Pacific campaign, achieving in 3 years what conventional estimates suggested would require 5 or more. The contrast between expectations and reality became a recurring theme in post-war analysis. Military planners on both sides had underestimated what determination and skill could achieve. The Japanese had assumed construction workers would prove ineffective under fire. American planners had doubted whether civilian tradesmen could adapt to military discipline and combat conditions. The Seabees proved both assessments wrong, demonstrating that professional expertise combined with military training created capabilities that exceeded conventional military engineering units. Statistical comparison illustrated the magnitude of Seabee achievements. Japanese forces had constructed approximately 50 airfields across the Pacific during 4 years of preparation before American entry into the war. The Seabees built over 100 airfields during 3 years of combat operations, completing each project in a fraction of the time required by Japanese engineers working under ideal conditions. The difference reflected not superior resources. Japanese forces had ample construction equipment and materials during their preparatory phase, but rather different organizational cultures and work philosophies. The changed perception extended beyond military circles. American public awareness of Seabee accomplishments grew throughout the war, fueled by press reports and documentary films that celebrated construction achievements alongside combat victories. The Seabees became symbols of American industrial might and practical expertise, representing the civilian skills that were transformed into military advantage. War bond campaigns featured Seabee imagery, and recruiting efforts emphasized the opportunity to serve by building rather than fighting. Though the reality involved both activities in equal measure, Japanese perception shifted from contempt to wariness to, ultimately, a kind of professional respect. Captured documents from late 1945 included technical analyses of American construction methods, with Japanese engineers acknowledging that the Seabee approach of prioritizing speed over perfection had proven superior under combat conditions. One report noted that Japanese military culture emphasized precise, methodical work, while American practice accepted temporary solutions that could be improved later. The assessment concluded that this philosophical difference, more than any material advantage, explained why American construction forces had proven more effective. By war's end, the Seabees had established a reputation that would outlast the conflict. They had proven that construction workers with military training could perform under conditions that defeated conventional military organizations. They had demonstrated that civilian expertise, properly harnessed, represented a military asset equal to any weapon. Most importantly, they had shown that determination and professional pride could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable, maintaining standards of workmanship even when circumstances suggested that merely adequate performance should suffice. August 1945 brought final validation of every Seabee construction project across the Pacific. The atomic bomb missions that ended the war launched from North Field on Tinian, where Seabees had built the world's largest operational airfield in less than 7 months. The B-29 Enola Gay took off from a runway that had not existed when American forces captured Tinian in July 1944. 3 days later, Boxcar followed from the same field, carrying the weapon that would strike Nagasaki. Both missions succeeded because Seabees had constructed facilities capable of supporting the most sophisticated aircraft of the era under conditions that would have defeated any conventional construction organization. The final tally of Seabee accomplishments documented work on a scale that defied peacetime comparison. Naval construction battalions had built or rehabilitated 111 major airstrips, 441 piers and causeways, 2,558 ammunition magazines, 700 square blocks of warehouse space, hospitals with over 70,000 beds, tanks for storage of 100 million gallons of gasoline, and housing for 1.5 million personnel. They had built these facilities while Japanese forces attempted to prevent construction through military action, completing projects in months that should have required years, even under ideal conditions. The human cost of these achievements remained visible in casualty statistics. The Seabees suffered 272 men killed in action during the Pacific War, with another 2,500 wounded. These numbers, though smaller than infantry casualties, represented approximately 5% of peak Seabee strength, a casualty rate that exceeded any other non-combat military organization. The dead had been construction workers who volunteered to build rather than fight, but who died because construction in combat zones proved as dangerous as infantry combat. Equipment losses paralleled human casualties. Seabee units in the Pacific wrote off over 300 bulldozers destroyed by enemy action, nearly 500 trucks lost to combat damage, and countless smaller machines wrecked beyond economical repair. Each lost bulldozer represented not just material value but also construction capacity. A destroyed machine meant work could not be completed until replacements arrived, potentially delaying projects that other operations depended upon. The Seabees maintained their construction schedules despite equipment losses by working remaining machines harder, extending maintenance intervals, and accepting higher failure rates as the price of maintaining momentum. Post-war analysis identified specific instances where Seabee construction had directly influenced strategic outcomes. At Guadalcanal, rapid completion of Henderson Field enabled American fighters to contest Japanese air superiority, preventing enemy reinforcement of ground forces and ensuring American retention of the island. At Bougainville, quick establishment of operational airstrips allowed American aircraft to neutralize Rabaul without direct invasion, saving thousands of casualties that would have resulted from assault on heavily fortified positions. In the Marianas, construction of B-29 bases brought Japanese cities within range of systematic bombing, making invasion of the home islands unnecessary and saving hundreds of thousands of American lives. The legacy extended beyond immediate military applications. Construction techniques developed by Seabees under combat conditions influenced post-war civil engineering, particularly regarding rapid construction and improvisation with available materials. The emphasis on getting projects operational quickly, even if subsequent improvements were needed, became standard practice in disaster response and emergency construction. Methods for working under adverse conditions, tropical environments, limited equipment, hostile circumstances, were incorporated into engineering curricula and military doctrine. Japanese engineers who survived the war and later studied American construction methods expressed particular interest in the Seabee approach to quality control. Rather than insisting on perfection before declaring projects complete, the Seabees built to minimum acceptable standards first, then improved facilities as time and resources permitted. This philosophy enabled rapid completion of essential work while ensuring that subsequent enhancements did not delay urgent operational requirements. Japanese engineering culture, which emphasized precision and completeness, had no equivalent practice, and post-war analysts concluded this difference had contributed significantly to American construction advantages during the conflict. The Seabees themselves dispersed after the war, returning to civilian occupations with skills refined by combat construction. Many became successful in building trades, leveraging experience gained building airfields under fire into peacetime careers. Others remained in military service, forming the core of naval construction battalions that would serve in subsequent conflicts. All carried forward the professional standards that had defined Seabee operations during the Pacific War. Complete the mission, regardless of obstacles, maintain quality even under adverse conditions, and take pride in work that would outlast the workers who built it. The consequences of Seabee construction extended far beyond immediate military objectives. The network of bases built across the Pacific created infrastructure that would shape the post-war world for decades. Airfields constructed under fire became civilian airports, connecting island communities to global commerce. Harbors dredged to support military operations transformed into commercial ports. Roads bulldozed through jungle to reach construction sites remained as transportation arteries that enabled economic development. The Seabees had built for war, but their work endured to serve peace. Wake Island illustrated the transformation. Japanese forces had captured Wake in December 1941, holding it throughout the war despite its isolation from other Japanese positions. When American forces reoccupied Wake in September 1945, they found infrastructure that Japanese engineers had maintained but not expanded. Seabees arrived within days, beginning rehabilitation and expansion of facilities that would serve as a trans-Pacific refueling stop for civilian aircraft. The runway they extended became part of commercial aviation routes connecting the United States with Asia, handling passenger traffic that would have seemed fantastic during the desperate days of 1942. Similar patterns repeated throughout the Pacific. Tinian's North Field, built to support B-29 bombers attacking Japan, became a cargo hub for commercial freight. Saipan's airfields evolved into tourist destinations, supporting an industry based on visiting World War II historical sites. Guam's facilities served both military and civilian purposes, creating economic opportunities for island residents that would not have existed without wartime construction. The Seabees had built strategic military assets, but those assets possessed enduring value that transcended their original purpose. The domino effect extended to military doctrine. The success of naval construction battalions demonstrated that specialized organizations combining technical expertise with military capability could achieve results impossible for either purely civilian contractors or conventional military engineering units. This recognition led to permanent incorporation of Seabee units into naval organization structure, ensuring the construction capability would remain available for future conflicts. The Korean War, Vietnam War, and subsequent operations all benefited from lessons learned building airfields under fire in the Pacific. Personnel policies evolved to reflect Seabee experience. The Naval Construction Force maintained its practice of recruiting skilled tradesmen from civilian life, offering military training to men who brought expertise earned in peacetime construction. This approach preserved the balance between military discipline and civilian craftsmanship that had proven so effective during World War II. Subsequent conflicts demonstrated that the combination remained valid. Construction workers with military training continued to perform under conditions that defeated conventional approaches. The strategic impact on American military capability proved enduring. The ability to rapidly establish forward bases became a defining characteristic of American power projection, enabling operations at distances that would have been impossible without sophisticated construction capability. During the Cold War, Seabees built facilities in locations ranging from Arctic ice sheets to tropical jungles, always maintaining the standards of rapid completion and functional adequacy that had defined Pacific operations during World War II. Japanese military analysis after the war acknowledged that underestimating American construction capabilities had been a critical strategic error. Intelligence assessments from 1942 that dismissed the Seabees as ineffective had contributed to faulty strategic planning, leading Japanese commanders to underestimate how quickly American forces could advance once island-hopping operations commenced. The failure to appreciate that construction workers could build under fire as effectively as they built in peacetime had cost Japan the defensive advantage that their pre-war fortification efforts should have provided. The legacy of Seabee construction persisted in unexpected ways. Engineers studying post-war reconstruction discovered that techniques developed for rapid military construction could be adapted to disaster recovery and humanitarian operations. The emphasis on working with available materials, accepting temporary solutions that could be improved later, and maintaining progress despite adverse conditions translated directly to situations where conventional approaches proved inadequate. Natural disasters, refugee crises, and development projects all benefited from methods refined by Seabees building airfields under Japanese bombardment. The last Seabee construction project of World War II occurred not in the Pacific, but in Tokyo Bay, where Naval Construction Battalion personnel built docking facilities for vessels bringing occupation forces to Japan in September 1945. The work proceeded without enemy opposition. A strange experience for men accustomed to building under fire. Japanese civilians watched from shore as American construction workers operated the same types of equipment that had built airfields throughout the Pacific, now employed for peaceful purposes. The contrast between combat construction and occupation work marked the transition from war to an uncertain peace. Veterans returning home carried memories that would shape the rest of their lives. Many had left civilian jobs in 1942, volunteering for military service because they possessed skills the Navy required. They returned to those same occupations, but their experiences had changed them. Construction workers who had built under artillery bombardment viewed peacetime projects differently, understanding that any obstacle short of enemy fire represented a manageable challenge. The discipline and determination that had completed airfields despite Japanese opposition translated into excellence in civilian work. Reunions began within months of demobilization as Seabee veterans sought to maintain connections forged under extraordinary circumstances. These gatherings were not primarily military in character. The Seabees had been construction workers first, soldiers only by necessity. Instead, reunions focused on shared professional experiences, men who had built together under conditions that exceeded anything possible in civilian life. They swapped stories about improvising solutions with inadequate equipment, completing projects ahead of impossible schedules, and maintaining standards when circumstances suggested that merely adequate performance should suffice. The 272 Seabees killed during the Pacific War remained present in memory. Each battalion maintained casualty lists, and annual memorial services honored those who had died building rather than fighting. The fallen had been welders, carpenters, electricians, mechanics, civilian tradesmen who volunteered for military service and paid the ultimate price. Their deaths had not occurred in conventional combat, but rather while operating bulldozers under artillery fire, repairing runways during air raids, and maintaining equipment when Japanese attacks threatened to overwhelm defensive positions. The artifacts they left behind endured as physical testament to their work. Runways built at Guadalcanal, Bougainville, and throughout the Pacific remained operational for decades after the war, supporting civilian aviation and military operations during subsequent conflicts. Harbor facilities constructed under fire served commercial shipping and naval vessels alike. Roads bulldozed through jungle vegetation to support construction projects became permanent infrastructure connecting previously isolated communities. The Seabees had built for immediate military necessity, but their work possessed quality that transcended urgent wartime requirements. In 1974, the Seabee Memorial was dedicated in Arlington, Virginia, not far from the Pentagon, where Admiral Moriel had proposed creation of naval construction battalions 30 years earlier. The bronze statue depicted a Seabee carrying a rifle and construction tools, symbols of the dual nature that had defined the organization. Visitors could read the names of those who had died in service, from World War II through Vietnam and subsequent conflicts. The memorial honored not just combat deaths, but the broader principle that building and defending were equally valuable contributions to national security. Modern military forces continue to rely on construction capabilities that trace directly to Seabee innovations during the Pacific War. The ability to rapidly establish forward bases remains essential to American military doctrine, enabling operations at global distances. Contemporary construction units employ sophisticated equipment that would have amazed World War II Seabees, but the fundamental principles remain unchanged. Complete projects rapidly, work under adverse conditions, maintain professional standards regardless of circumstances, and take pride in construction that will outlast the builders. The final assessment of Seabee contributions came not from military historians, but from the men who had flown missions supported by Seabee-built airfields. B-29 pilots who made emergency landings at Iwo Jima understood that their survival depended on runways constructed while Japanese artillery continued firing. Fighter pilots operating from strips completed within days of island capture recognized that rapid construction had enabled air superiority that made subsequent operations possible. The bomber crews who struck Japan from Tinian knew that without Seabee construction, the strategic bombing campaign would have been impossible. These airmen needed no scholarly analysis to appreciate what the Seabees had accomplished. They were alive because construction workers had built runways under fire and refused to accept that adverse conditions made good work impossible. The legacy endures in concrete and steel, in runways still supporting aircraft 75 years after they were built, in harbors that continue serving commercial shipping, and in the memory of men who transformed civilian skills into military capability. The Seabees proved that determination and expertise could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable, that professional standards could be maintained even under enemy fire, and that construction workers with military training represented strategic assets equal to any weapon. They built the infrastructure that won the Pacific War, working under conditions that would have defeated any organization less committed to excellence. Their motto, "We build, we fight," captured the essential truth that building and defending were not separate activities, but complementary aspects of the same mission. The Seabees built, and in building, they fought more effectively than many who carried only weapons.